I've been asked to provide a few dates to give a time frame for the things I refer to in these publications. So I'll do that first. We'll get onto the title and then into the text. On this occasion, I'll read most of it because it's quite a complex area, and I'll try and get it right rather than wander off and say things which may not be quite exact or correct. So this covers the translation of the Rosetta Stone and the way it unlocked an entire culture and records on the temples in Egypt and elsewhere. The Rosetta Stone itself was made about in the region of 200 BC, and it consists of three sets of texts which ostensibly are translations of each other: the hieroglyphic, demotic, and finally ancient Greek. You could argue that there are more than three sets of languages involved with this, because you might also say, of course, after that you have the modern European languages into which it was translated, particularly French and English, and that's also relevant. But those last two are not essential to understanding what we're going on about here. Anyway, after the Rosetta Stone was made, round about AD 400, knowledge of hieroglyphs just disappeared, and consequently that ancient language and a large, if not all, of the culture associated with it just disappeared into history, as good as dead, and almost impossible to recover for 1500 years outwards, or at least 1000 anyway. Arabian and Western scholars tried to unlock this language which seemed to be so far away. The general belief was quasi-Platonic, that the words referred to forms, or some people call them concepts, and so all was just a matter of that you just found out what these forms were and you managed to get the language, which I think is hideously simplistic, but it was very attractive in an age which was dominated by Platonic philosophy in one way or the other. It obviously changed through Aristotle and so on and so forth, but it was heavily embedded in Western religion, and yeah, I think it had a huge influence on the Arabian scholars also. And then round about in the late 18th century, sort of 1790s, when Napoleon was on his imperial expeditions in northern Egypt, a French soldier found this Rosetta Stone when he was digging, and thought it would be a good idea to refer it to the scholars which Napoleon had brought along with him, to see if they could make sense out of the hieroglyphics, because on the face of it, it looked like a crib sheet. You could sort of work back from one language to the other and you get a result. But it turned out it wasn't that easy. As I explain how it was discovered, you'll see that it was a lot harder than translating, for instance, from English into French or vice versa, because the hieroglyphic language is really quite sophisticated, and it's a sort of hybrid, but we'll cover in a moment or two. And so today we see or know of a culture, parts of it, which would otherwise have been totally unknown were it not for two or three very clever and dedicated people that helped unlock it. And those include a famous British physicist, a French genius, and I think it's a Swedish diplomat, I'm not certain. They all did their bit. So here we go. ignorance of modern language mirrors the ignorance that prevented the truth being found easily when the Rosetta Stone was found. Hieroglyphics were assumed to be ideograms, symbols, nothing else, standing for ideas or concepts. Failure to realize the difference between them leads a similar self-imposed intellectual blindness or mental block to appreciating the sophistication of modern human language. Claims that words totally control how and what we think arise from fashionable, dead-end intellectual blindness, quite similar to that which dominated over 1500 years in those confronted by the mystery of ancient Egyptian language. Concepts assume a kind of remote domain where they exist independent of individual minds, each with a distinct boundary of meaning. Ideas differ and can arise from the combination of meanings followed by metamorphosis to produce or reproduce meanings that can't exist without humanity. The distinction between concept and idea is at the root of modern ignorance of the sophistication of language that we use. Please ignore the shock horror, click-grabbing headline. This YouTube presentation, which I link in the text, provides a very good historic record of cultural assumptions preventing translation of hieroglyphic text and how eventually it came to be understood. The process of discovery started with an assumption that all three texts were bound to include references to authorities such as officials or pharaohs. From this it appeared that the text was a mixture of phonetic constructions and ideas, not just referring to a bunch of quasi-Platonic forms or concepts. Thomas Young, he of Young's modulus fame in physics, set to work on the ovals, sort of ovoid lines containing hieroglyphic symbols, which are called cartouches. And it turned out they spelt the name Ptolemy phonetically, proving some symbols were phonetic, in this case spelling a name. Obsession with quasi-Platonic forms, now commonly called concepts, led generations of academics and intellectuals up a dead-end path. I just go through here on the written text several images showing cartouches and showing the Greek and how it relates to the cartouches. And on the this is how it appears on the Rosetta Stone, not the arrows and stuff. Hieroglyphics are a combination of phonetics to make words, single markers for ideas, like our use of a dollar sign or pound sign, or determinatives, e.g., is it about a god, man, action, or place? In this case, crucially, a name is not a concept or an idea. Just doing with editing now. It identifies an individual or group of individuals by phonetic construction of a word. Champollion was the genius who solved the mystery. His knowledge of Coptic, closely related to Demotic, although not in script, on the Rosetta Stone provided information about the sound of Demotic words and, following through, the sound of hieroglyphic speech. Devoid of punctuation to determine which combinations of letters and words were to metamorphose into meaning, identifying individual sounds, enabled distinctions necessary to combine to create meaning common to the three texts. Recently, it has been found that the hieroglyphics are rather more absolute in terms of rights and duties than the softened versions in Demotic and Greek translations. This was obviously for political reasons, not to upset the Demotic and Greek crowd. The ability to gather meaning from text without familiar punctuation in, say, modern English can be demonstrated by presenting text stripped of it. Intent on seeking meaning, although difficult, it's usually possible to work out what's being said. The editor of the manuscript of the Seven Pillars of Wisdom had to insert hundreds of commas because T.E. Lawrence refused to use them. Had he a similar attitude to paragraphs, I expect that hurdle too could have been overcome. A fashionable flawed view of language, particularly that promoted by Wittgenstein, a reiteration found in Whole Word Teaching of Reading several decades later, is based on the similar cultural fixation and mistake that words signify concepts or ideas when they really stand for phonetics. Isolated words have little meaning, but when they combine, useful meaning appears through metamorphosis, where the result is not the logical sum of meanings of words, but the product of metamorphic combination. Concepts in their special heaven or abstract library are distinct. Ideas are not. Where an idea can multiply, depending on the number of those who know it, concepts are supposed to be special, remote from individuals, designed for us to refer to them, saving us from the illusion of solipsism. Ideas can result from many combining, and hundreds of words, phrases, sentences, and even paragraphs can combine to make one idea. There are an infinite number of potential ideas where concepts are carefully controlled by academics and certain parts of the intelligentsia. In the worst kind of universities, academics determine what is a concept and what is not. So creativity, discovery, and boundaries of acceptable discussion are most rigorously patrolled, constrained, and enforced. The last place you'll find philosophy is in the University Department of Philosophy. And it's quite shocking that they did not learn from the genius who brought back Egyptian hieroglyphical language and some of a long-lost culture from the dead. And history is quite incredible. And when you sort of dig around a bit, and the internet has been a wonderful thing for me to do this, you find all sorts of strange things and relationships and perspectives which otherwise I would never have stumbled on. The idea that the process of translation or rediscovery of hieroglyphics could reflect on what I consider to be close to disastrous views of modern language is quite remarkable. But there's most definitely a link. Words and language and how meaning comes, metamorphoses out of collections of words, phrases, paragraphs, sentences, whatever, all the way through the books, is just quite remarkable. There's a sort of magic about it. And the fact that we've been able to resurrect a complex language like the hieroglyphical one, as it were, from the dead, and to learn so much more about a culture that survived developed, it wasn't one culture, constantly changing, for 4,000 years plus, maybe 5,000 years, is incredible. And this is all because of the gift of possibly three minds. I think in the end it would have been, as it were, the encryption would be discovered and solved, but it would have taken a lot longer if there weren't at least three and one particularly obsessive mind to get there. So I look at modern academia and it breaks my heart. They really have little or no idea. And it's because they come down pretty hard on students who have minds of their own. But by golly, they're rough on each other if someone steps out of line. They're quite brutal, as we all know, with examples of people who dared not conform to the fashionable ideology, quasi-Marxist ideology, that is now dominating universities, the British establishment, and politicians. They are pathetic in their cringing fear. And anyone who steps out of line gets hit in the neck big time. These are interesting times. And here's another example of how culture and its gatekeepers have held back intellectual progress in the most appalling fashion. We've made phenomenal technological progress in 200 years, maybe 250. Eye-watering speed things have been developed. It's just fantastic. But in terms of understanding society, understanding culture, understanding the source of human freedom, and respect for humanity, I think we're going in reverse gear. It's as if we didn't learn the lesson of the mid-20th century ideological war. And we're tempting fate by denying the pathetic state of the humanities certainly in British universities, because academics don't even understand the contradictory nature of culture, society, and subjective thought. It's patently obvious we're contradictory creatures, but they don't get their minds around it. They still believe in some kind of wonderfully consistent, logical, social utopia. It's childish. They really are appalling in many ways. And meanwhile, students with minds of their own, 95% of them don't last the course. Because to do so in an academic environment, you have to give up on yourself. It is that bad. And the current ignorance of politicians about the nature of society, culture, and so on and so forth, is, if it was deliberate, it would be criminal. In a way, it's worse because they're unaware of it. It'd be criminal. So the Rosetta Stone teaches quite a bit, not just about hieroglyphs, but also about the nature of language and meaning and its foundations. And it's the way it was discovered and the people involved run in direct conflict with the fashionable whole word attitude and the Wittgensteinian approach and linguistic philosophy, which is an insult to human freedom and creativity. It's pathetic. And I certainly will not tolerate it. And people will begin to realise it's a form of mental enchainment. Things are changing. And I think in so many years' time, people will look back on the 20th century and maybe the first half of the 21st century with pity, in the same way that people of Enlightenment Enlightenment looked back on the theologically dominated period in the first half of the millennium, the second millennium. Anyway, there we go. Thanks for that, and we'll see if this one does well. I suspect that it won't be very popular because it is a seemingly very strange and obscure subject, but who knows?